Hello and welcome to the legend of Nobunaga. This week we're facing the Battle of Kuzuryu River, which is a level 10 difficulty battle, which means it's going to be good. Quite a long episode this week since this battle was supposedly so hard that they decided to make it take ages, or at least the way I did it took ages, we'll see. So we're facing Kenshin Uesugi, who I guess after the death of Takeda Shingen is now the greatest warlord in the land. Although you could say that he's not really. Kind of depends how you interpret it. Let's have a look at the story.
Kenshin Uesugi had swept through Noto. He had taken the fortress of Nanao Castle. To stop the advance of the Uesugi forces, Oda sent Katsuie Shibata into the Kaga area. The two forces clashed at Tedorigawa.
Wipe them out.
Tedorigawa was the historical conflict between Nobunaga and Kenshin. Nobunaga was actually there.
He's too strong.
Kenshin destroyed the Shibata force and moved into Echizen. His plan was to draw out Nobunaga and throw all of his forces into one huge battle.
This is where it begins to become fictitious. Obviously, I'm going to explain the true historical tale, but for now, let's focus on what the legend is presenting as the conflict between Nobunaga and Kenshin Uesugi, the final battle of Kuzuryu River. Let's see what Uesugi is up to in his camp.
Lord Kenshin, reports say Shibata has joined up with Oda. Perhaps it would have been better to finish them.
I will not attack someone who is already beaten.
You seem to be enjoying this.
Nobunaga managed to defeat the Takeda clan. He must be exceptional. I am eager to find out.
Uesugi has had a 10-year rivalry with the Takeda clan and has never been able to defeat them properly. So he's very impressed by the fact that Nobunaga did it in his first attempt. Oh, and his second attempt, in fact.
Kenshin. He's as strong as I thought. It would seem we still have much to learn. But it is because we are weak that we push to strengthen ourselves, that we think of ways to win. How about it?
Tomorrow, there'll be a deep fog.
Then we will be attacked. We must be ready.
Those dragons don't bode well. So Nobunaga predicts that Kenshin Uesugi is going to attack him in the fog and decides to come up with some sort of counter-attack to deal with it.
All right, let's begin. We have plans to make.
Our scouts have reported in. They outline the following situation.
So as I've been slightly hinting, this is a non-historical battle. It has been made up, which I'll explain in detail in a moment.
We can claim victory when Kenshin Uesugi is defeated. The Uesugi camp is here, but we don't know where Kenshin is.
This map is very maze-like, as you can see, so you know something crazy is going to happen.
Kenshin may have surprised me earlier, but this time I'll show him I'm the better man.
Yeah, we'll show him a thing or two.
Some pretty weak trash talking from
Lord
Toshie
Nobunaga,
there.
may we know your plans for deployment?
So let me talk you through what I was thinking with this level. Being level 10 difficulty, I was kind of thinking I was going to play it cautiously. After the last level 10 difficulty battle, which I thought wasn't actually too difficult, I thought that this one was going to be the true difficult level since it's further on in the game. And we're facing the great Kenshin Uesugi, and that Nobunaga had just lost the Battle of Tedorigawa, which was his actual fight with Uesugi. So I thought the game might try and make it really hard for you to overturn history and have Nobunaga win instead. You can look at these tips here. Consider why Kenshin chose this place to fight. I'm not sure what that's about. I have some suspicions as to what it might have been about, which we'll see in the level. So what I decided to do was place Kicho with Nobunaga on the left flank to give you some mobile elements. Here in the centre I wanted something a little bit more stable, so I put my heavy infantry base. Using the newly reunited Toshie, he seems to have levelled up while he's away. And Musashi, I've been using Musashi Miyamoto as one of my frontline units after unlocking him in the last battle, and he is really good, so I'm really enjoying using him even though he's not historical. Katsuie and Masanori over here on the flank to provide a more mobile element to deal with this east flank. I'm going to get slightly confused during the battle about what the map layout's like. There's lots of little passages which I thought you could move down and you can't. And, well, we'll see all of that once we get in there. Basically, Kenshin Uesugi has been doing some cheekiness. These orders I'm giving here were actually intended to, well, this one isn't, but a lot of them were intended to try and find items hidden around the beginning of the battlefield. So you can see I'm like, Nobunaga, I could advance towards the enemy, sort of considering it, then I'm like, nah, there's probably an item down in the bottom left-hand corner, let's go backwards to begin. Plus, I wasn't too enthusiastic about charging forward, because I was 100% sure
plan, my lord.
that Kenshin was going to ambush me from the fog.
Alright, let's move out. Remember, we fight for the land and for peace!
Right, time for some more peace by killing some more people. Works every time.
Kenshin Uesugi, the man they call the god of war.
Bishomonten.
But that ends today.
I think that's the god of war in Japanese. Can't remember. Something like Bishomonten. So the battle begins. What you're going to see initially is me looking for items, and I decide to focus all of my initial approach on the east side of the map, completely ignoring all the western passes up into the mountains, because I wanted to keep my force together so they didn't get ambushed. I'm actually going to play this level really carefully, so you'll see it goes a little bit slowly as a result, but that gives me all the more time to talk about a couple of topics I wanted to discuss around this battle. The first of which I guess I should say is who is Kenshin Uesugi. The game doesn't really introduce him very much. We just see him as this slightly religious character wearing a monk's headdress who seems to have some concept of honor. He doesn't want to defeat Nobunaga if it looks like he's not going to put up a good fight. But who was he really? Kenshin Uesugi was the leader of the Uesugi clan since he was about 14. He actually took part in a coup against his incompetent brother. Some of the other retainers of the clan helped him take part in a coup against his brother in order to take over the Uesugi clan in their domain of Echigo. Echigo is to the northeast of Owari. Generally the northeast of all the areas we've been seeing so far in the game. We haven't really made contact with it. It's north of the Takeda domain, which has been mentioned a few times. But anyway, since he's 14 he takes control of this clan, and he proved himself to be quite an able warrior and an able leader. So he was very effective, and this is basically why he came to be known as one of the greatest commanders, was his early prowess against the internal conflicts and against the Takeda, because for the first 10 years of his rule he would be constantly fighting with Shingen Takeda, who would become his greatest rival, and their rivalry would become something of legend, which I'll discuss in a moment. They would face 5 engagements, only one of which was decisive. All 5 of these engagements took place in the same place, a place called Kawanakajima, I think. Yeah, Kawanakajima Fields. It's like this big open plain surrounded on 3 sides by rivers. A very interesting battle site. And they would, through various mechanisms, end up fighting each other there. The 2 armies of Uesugi Kenshin and Shingen Takeda were the only 2 armies in historical Sengoku Japan that employed things like tactical maneuvering and the use of formations in order to unnerve the opponent. So both of them were doing these crazy maneuvers in front of each other, and for some reason these maneuvers would always end up having the 2 armies finish facing off against each other on the Kawanakajima plain. A quick note, you just saw in the level, Katsuie's unit broke through a rock to enter the little area on the corner of the map, and there was nothing there. That was kind of strange. Well, at least I thought it was strange when I was playing it, and I think, in retrospect, I worked out what the whole point of that was, but we'll see in a moment. Anyway, let me talk a little bit about Kawanakajima. So this is the battle between Shingen Takeda and Uesugi Kenshin, and in particular, the 4th battle of Kawanakajima has become almost legendary because it represents the decisive conflict between Uesugi and Takeda, in which I guess neither side could claim victory because they were such well-matched opponents. Basically, Takeda had been constantly threatening the Uesugi domain because Takeda were a very warlike clan trying to expand their influence. And their territories were to the south of the Uesugi domain, and they kept moving armies up towards them as if they were going to invade. And after this had happened 3 times, Kenshin got very annoyed and decided to counter-invade and take an army down towards Takeda territory. When Shingen learned of this, he quickly mustered an army and began to lead them up to face off against Kenshin Uesugi. What Kenshin decided to do was camp on top of a hill in the middle of a large plain, and he basically refused to move as Takeda's forces approached. So Shingen realized that he was going to have to force a battle to happen. For the last 3 times they've encountered, they hadn't really fought each other other than quick skirmishes. The armies had just stood off against each other. Neither side had been willing to give the orders to engage because they were too cautious and tactical. They didn't want to commit when they didn't know that they were going to win. So both sides ended up withdrawing each time. But now Shingen realized that if he withdrew, this invasion force would just keep pushing into Takeda territory and possibly do some real damage. So he knew he had to at least bloody them, at least lower their morale. So he came up with a plan. His plan was to break his army into 2 halves, send one half around the back of the hill onto a set of plains at night, and the other half was going to attack up the hill with a night attack. His plan being that his night attack would confuse the Uesugi forces, and that Kenshin would order them to rally at a stronger point off the hill. And Shingen predicted where this point was going to be, and had positioned the second half of his army there, ready to ambush the Uesugi forces. Now this seemed like a pretty good plan, and it probably would have worked. Unfortunately, Kenshin found out that that was the plan before it happened, and he decides to come up with some sort of counter plan. And what he does is pretty miraculous, actually. He takes his forces on the hill just as night is falling, and sneaks them off, and begins to move them down towards the plains where he knows the rest of the Takeda army is going to ambush him. So he basically takes his force and deliberately puts it in the ambush site in advance, so he can counter-ambush the ambushing forces as they arrive. But the real achievement is that he basically moved around 13,000 troops, including all of their camp supplies and their supply train, off of a hill and across a river without the Takeda forces, which were within visual distance of them, noticing. I don't know how he did this. He just made his troops move silently somehow, all 13,000 of them. The Takeda army was 20,000 strong, by the way, so they had the numerical advantage. Anyway, so he manages to do this, and what he does is cross a river onto the plain at Kawanakajima, and he splits off a couple of thousand of his troops and leaves them at the river as a screening force, whereas the rest of his army goes to ambush the other half of the Takeda army. Now the Takeda ambush force contains their main command staff, including Shingen Takeda himself, which means if he can defeat that side of the force that was going to attack up the hill, which is now going to be attacking a fake camp, should hopefully retreat or just defeat themselves somehow. That was Kenshin's plan, and I guess it almost worked. What happened was the Takeda force leading the night attack up the hill indeed went ahead, took the bait, went up the hill, found no one there, and were very confused. Meanwhile, as dawn was breaking over at the plains of the ambush site, the Uesugi army was advancing right into the Takeda army as it came up to the ambush site, and basically began to inflict very heavy damage on them because Kenshin had come up with a revolutionary tactic. It wasn't revolutionary in sort of world history, but it was in Japanese history. What he was doing was a sort of cycling formation. But let me just say, here in the level, I thought I could cross this river and reach the north part of the map from here, but only when I actually got up here did I realise that you can't. So I'm going to have to move all my forces right back to the beginning to then attack the west side of the map, which was very annoying, but what can you do? It did make things easier because it meant I was pretty much invulnerable from attacks from behind now. There weren't going to be any flanking attacks unless any enemy units suddenly appeared out of nowhere, which wasn't impossible. Anyway, I was about to tell you what Kenshin's magical tactic was. His tactic was this cycling formation where the individuals at the front of the fighting line would constantly cycle out with the man standing behind them every now and again. And basically this system would keep cycling people forwards and backwards in order to ensure that the man with the fewest wounds and the most energy was always at the front of the formation. Whereas traditionally, basically the man at the front would just fight until they were too wounded and would be dragged away by someone behind them, or they died where they stood. It was actually more common for people to be wounded than to die, but whatever. But this tactic meant that the fighting force at the front line was always cutting at the Takeda fighting force on their front line, which were often wounded or didn't have enough energy to fight with the fresh Uesugi troops constantly coming up to the front. And his army, well, basically it was destroying the Takeda army. Takeda was rapidly losing troops, as Uesugi wasn't. Takeda lost a great number of their generals as well, which was a massive problem. In fact, it became so advantageous, the situation for Uesugi, that Kenshin Uesugi himself grabbed the horse, grabbed his sword, and he just rode out into the battlefield and single-handedly charged through the Takeda ranks right into the Takeda's command post behind their lines. And Shingen Takeda, supposedly, was standing there, and he decided to try and kill him and inflict a fatal blow. He rode up with his sword, but Shingen Takeda was well trained in a little-known martial art where you use your iron war fan, usually used for directing troops, to actually fight in combat. So although Shingen was unarmed, Uesugi slashes at him with his sword, but being deflected with this little iron war fan. We've seen quite a lot of people carrying these fans in The Legend of Nobunaga. They're sort of, perhaps they're smaller than a piece of paper, you'd hold them in your hand. He was somehow deflecting these sword blows, and then a few of his bodyguards and retainers came up and saved him, but really that's kind of a legendary story. But let's have a look at what's happening here in the game. Some sort of cavalry coming out of the mist, and here's Uesugi. Kenshin. You can see he's actually holding the war fan I just mentioned, so you can see the sort of thing I meant. Doesn't look very deadly as a weapon, but there were certain martial arts which used them, and I believe Shingen would have known them.
I'm reminded of Kawanakajima.
He must have heard me talking about it. Not sure why he was reminded of Kawanakajima. This battle is in no way similar. I guess the fact that there were rivers there were lots of rivers near Kawanakajima. So you can see Kenshin Uesugi just suddenly appears, so there really was an ambush coming out of the mist. Luckily I had all of my units here, because I've been cautious in keeping everyone together, which means I could completely surround him and bombard him with all my attacks simultaneously. Whereas what the game had wanted me to do was to send Nobunaga straight up the west flank at the beginning and have him be ambushed. So I can see what they were doing there, but in my desire to go and find items, inadvertently stopped their plan from happening, so I'm pretty happy about that. You can also see I'm using debuffs, because the enemy come out of hiding with buffs already on them. If you use a debuff, it not only cancels the buff they have, but gives them the debuff you've used. So they go from being unusually strong to being unusually weak, which means I'm going to be able to finish off this ambushing force faster than normal. Although you'll see this ambushing force actually just disappears randomly in a moment. I think that's a scripted event in the game. We end up facing these units again a little bit later in the level. Anyway, what was I saying? Yes, I was just about to say that this thing about Kenshin and Shingen fighting is probably a legend. Here's Kenshin again. Let's see what he's up to now.
This is a waste of time. Nobunaga may be both wise and brave, but he has not yet mastered the art of strategy.
I don't see why he says that.
I leave the rest to you.
So Uesugi can't be bothered to fight me anymore. Kenshin Uesugi, sorry, can't be bothered, and he leaves his son to fight me instead. And I don't really see why. I think he was just getting a little bit of sour grapes because I was beating him. Whatever. But yes, it's probably just a legend, the fight that Kenshin fought with Shingen Takeda, his rivalry, just to add to the legend of their rivalry, I guess. It's pretty likely he actually fought with one of the Shingen's body doubles. We saw in the battle against Takeda that he actually did use body doubles against us in the battle. And by us, I mean the Oda forces. So it is, I don't know, unlikely that they actually fought each other, but whatever. So what was the result of the battle of Kawanakajima, the fourth battle in particular? Well, you could say it was a victory for Uesugi, because as I said, he defeated many Takeda troops and defeated many generals, but unfortunately for Uesugi, the screening force he had left at the river was insufficient, which means the other half of the Takeda army, which had found the empty hilltop and was now coming towards them, could just break through.
I have been expecting you. I have something.
Here's an interesting letter. We see something about that Lord Kenshin is hiding up at a mountain, like some sort of temple up in the mountain, and that there are monuments in the forest. Well, I've actually already destroyed all these monuments. These are all the rocks. If you've been watching carefully, I've been destroying these random rocks that were blocking some of the paths. We can see that the temple is up here on the map. So I think at this stage I'd sort of done this level in the optimum order by accident, because I assume the game expects you to go north, see this village, and then go back and go and look for the rocks. But I done all the rocks in advance, which means I could just continue onwards, which is pretty cool. Anyway, as I was saying, the rest of the Takeda force eventually came into the battlefield, and Uesugi had no choice but to retreat, even though he was winning, because he would have been attacked from behind. And he probably would have lost if he'd been attacked from behind, so he was forced to retreat, which meant that the Takeda defense was successful, and the Uesugi invasion force basically had to rout all the way back north to Echigo province, and they actually lost quite a lot of their troops during the ensuing rout as well. So Kenshin almost won. He very nearly won. If the other half of the Takeda army had taken longer in showing up, or his screening force had managed to hold them up for longer, he probably would have gained a strategic victory in the battle, but unfortunately he didn't. Let's talk about the casualties of the battle, because I believe, this may not be correct, but I think I read somewhere that this battle between Kenshin and Shingen was the bloodiest battle in terms of proportion of people who died compared to how many were there. So I think maybe 7,000 people died out of the 30,000 or so people who were there, which I guess it doesn't sound like a lot, but that is quite a significant amount, considering that the people who die in samurai-style battles are the people on the front lines, the samurai mostly, the people who matter, which means if you lose them, your army essentially can't continue to fight. In fact, that's one of the main reasons that people believe that basically there's a legend, not a legend, like some sources say that Kenshin lost just as many troops as Takeda and that really it was a stalemate. But the fact that Kenshin was on campaigns basically immediately after this battle, doing campaigns elsewhere against the Hojo clan, suggests that his army basically wasn't damaged by this battle at all, because you couldn't resume campaigns if you'd taken thousands of losses like that, especially if those thousands of losses were to your samurai, who you'd have to try and find new ones to replace them, otherwise your army would be too weak in the future to fight again. But anyway, that battle isn't really related to the battle we're seeing here today. I just wanted to tell you that story because it's one of the great legendary battles of Japanese history, and I think this is pretty much the only opportunity I'm going to have to talk about it. So let's talk about Oda Nobunaga and his conflict with Kenshin Uesugi. As I said, the actual conflict was the Battle of Tedorigawa, which was just mentioned in the cutscene before this level. They showed Katsuie and Toshie losing the battle by just kind of leaning back on their horses and going, "Oh, this is awkward, I think we're losing." It's a little bit more detailed than that, what really happened. Firstly, Nobunaga was there. Nobunaga was actually in command. And it was actually... yeah, it was quite a bad defeat for Nobunaga, to be honest. The game has a tendency not to show Nobunaga in a negative light, so perhaps they wanted to make it look like Katsuie and Toshie had lost the battle rather than Nobunaga had lost the battle. But Nobunaga was in fact there. But maybe I should talk about the build-up, because we could ask, why was Uesugi there? Why was Nobunaga fighting the Uesugi clan? Like, their power bases are so far apart from each other, they shouldn't even be coming into contact. And basically it was because Uesugi, like all other warlords at the time, had ambitions on the capital, and Nobunaga had built this huge castle at Azuchi, as was mentioned in the previous couple of episodes, which really just blocked their access to the capital. It was kind of seen as an affront to Uesugi's domain in the north, because it gave him a really good base to invade Uesugi's territory, or not really their territory, but the area they were very influential in. So there was kind of growing hostility, especially because with the demise of Takeda Shingen and the Takeda clan, Uesugi didn't have a strong mutual enemy with Oda, so there was nothing they could really work together over, so it kind of really pushed them apart, despite them being vaguely friends in the past. So what the Uesugi did, basically, or what Kenshin did specifically, was he decided to push west and take over a place called Nanao Castle, which was actually mentioned in the cutscene. Nanao Castle was controlled by a clan called the Hatakeyama, I think, and the Hatakeyama were kind of like a vassal clan of the Oda clan. They were close allies. The Oda clan regarded themselves as the protectors of the Hatakeyama clan, and at the moment the Hatakeyama clan were undergoing civil strife. They had some internal bickering for power, and Kenshin took advantage of this by invading, sieging their main castle whilst they were distracted with internal fighting and trying to force them to surrender. And Nobunaga then says, well, you are inflicting damage upon one of my allies, I refuse to stand for this, and used that as his pretext for invading Uesugi. Of course, he had many other reasons to want to invade, because if he could remove Kenshin Uesugi, who was one of the Great Warlords, he would put himself even higher on the chart of Great Warlords remaining in Japan. Especially because the Uesugi clan was aiding a lot of the sects at the Ishiyama fortress, which we're going to be seeing in next week's episode, and we've seen already in previous episodes. In fact, last week we saw Ishiyama fortress. Yes, the Uesugi clan was helping them out with supplies and stuff. So he would be in some ways defeating two enemies simultaneously if he could remove the Uesugi's influence from central Japan. So he had strong reason to try and defeat them. So yes, he marches up with the pretext of helping out his ally, but before he gets there, his ally actually surrenders to Uesugi and decides to become a vassal of the Uesugi clan rather than of the Oda clan, which means now his pretext is gone, but he's already there. However, he doesn't show the reckless desire for offensive action that he usually does, and decides to instead buckle down and do a defensive battle. So he goes to the Tedori River, Tedorigawa, Gawa as a suffix basically meaning river, such as in Anigawa, one of the battles we've seen previously. And he builds a whole bunch of palisades and cannonades and gets his rifle troops up, similar to the Battle of Nagashino, and gets ready to mount a defensive battle at a river crossing point. Now, Kenshin Uesugi is too much of a genius to fall for such a trick as attacking the enemy's strong point, so he just says, well, obviously we need to make Nobunaga come out of his defensive and just defeat him in the field, because he knew that Nobunaga's forces were mostly not samurai. Nobunaga was a big fan of using peasant soldiers in large numbers rather than using smaller numbers of samurai troops, mainly because it was easier, I guess, and because it definitely put up more of an imposing show on the battlefield, I don't know. You can see here in the game, the enemy general, whose name I forget actually, the son of Kenshin Uesugi, is here and using this weird wave skill. I've seen this wave skill used against me by many enemies. Here we go, it's Kagekatsu Uesugi. And it's really powerful and it really devastates my units, and it keeps happening. I need to get used to using the silent skill more often. In fact, I'm going to be using the silent skill later on Kenshin, because I was almost sure he would do the same thing to me. So I guess it's good that I learned the lesson here, ready to apply it later. Excuse me. So anyway, Nobunaga, as I said, has set up this defensive position, and Kenshin wants to draw him out, and Kenshin has a plan. Basically, this river, Tedorigawa, is used for irrigation, which means further upriver there are thousands of dams and such used to redirect water in various directions, and Kenshin knows he can use this to his advantage. But first, what he needs Nobunaga to do is move forward right up to the river. So he does some interesting fake troop maneuvers. He moves banners and such to make it look like he's dividing his force for some reason. And Nobunaga, being the offensive general that he is, knows that attacking a divided force is the best way to rout an army by defeating individual weakened components of it. So he thinks this is an opportunity just to charge his entire army forward, try and defeat the Uesugi forces on the other side of the river crossing, whereas the rest of them have been divided and are off somewhere else doing something.
Nobunaga, I may have underestimated you as an opponent.
You can see here that Kenshin thinks he's underestimated Nobunaga because I destroyed their camp. Well, there you go. Anyway, so Nobunaga takes the bait, of course. He charges forward into the river, and at that very moment, Kenshin's agents all up the river close all the floodgates and force as much water as they can to remain in the river instead of going into irrigation channels. And this basically means the fording point of the river, where his forces are marching across, suddenly becomes very deep, which means their charge is completely halted because you can't run through water when it gets like waist deep. Plus, a lot of his troops were firearm troops. Now, I've mentioned it before, but firearms don't really work in this era if they get wet. And fighting in a raging river is not a good way to keep your firearms dry. So basically Nobunaga was in big trouble at this point. His forces were not only being thrown off balance, unable to move forward because of the current, they were unable to fire at the Uesugi forces, which meant when Kenshin sent his forces to attack them in the river, they were sitting ducks. And basically a rout quickly ensues, Nobunaga's forces scrambling to get out of the river, whereas Kenshin's forces are firing fires and arrows in at them and taking them out. It's just too difficult for them to get out of the way because the current is too strong. But anyway, Nobunaga suffers quite a defeat here, and Uesugi's forces chase him a small distance and take out a large number of his men in retreat. So it's a massive defeat for Nobunaga. Nothing gained from it really, except the lesson that he had a weakness, which I guess was his impetuousness, which was actually mentioned in the cutscene earlier. He was saying something about trying to grow stronger to overcome weaknesses and that sort of thing. That was actually the end of Nobunaga's war with Kenshin. Nothing else happened. This battle is not historical, as I said, because Kenshin died very shortly after that battle took place. Basically, after Tedorigawa, instead of pressing home the advantage, Kenshin just moved his troops all the way back to Echigo because he wasn't interested in continuing the campaign. And this was hinted at in the cutscene when he said something like, "I refuse to pursue a defeated opponent," or something. So that sort of hinted at his behaviour. He goes back home, Nobunaga goes back home, and the war remains unresolved. Neither side really captures or loses anything. It's just the reputation was at stake, and Nobunaga lost out. Now, Kenshin was probably planning to take advantage of Nobunaga's weakness and invade the next year, but unfortunately for him, he died of illness. He actually had stomach cancer, it's believed. Also, Kenshin was a really heavy drinker, a real waster, and this probably exacerbated his cancer a fair bit and caused him to die very prematurely. So he basically dies immediately after the battle of Tedorigawa, and because he set up this weird system of inheritance within the Uesugi clan, there's almost immediate infighting. The clan descends into civil war, and Nobunaga is saved from the wrath of the Uesugi clan and just has to cease to worry about them. So even though he didn't defeat them in battle, they defeated themselves, and Nobunaga was saved. Incredibly lucky, especially when you think about that's exactly the same way he was saved from Shingen Takeda, Kenshin's rival, because Shingen just sort of died serendipitously just before he could have invaded Oda's home territory. And then this again caused various issues within Takeda and eventually led to their decline after Nagashino due to the inferior leadership of his successor. So on both these occasions, Nobunaga has been extremely lucky. It's very silly, really. Like, a lot of Nobunaga's achievements are put down to his personal skill, but it does seem that these battles against these two great warlords, Shingen and Uesugi, Kenshin, were very much down to luck how he came about it, just serendipity of them dying. But still, Nobunaga won a strategic victory despite losing the battle and losing a large amount of men. And so the game has made up this Kuzuryu River thing to just sort of make it look like that Nobunaga at least won something to justify Uesugi being defeated in the legend, rather than just having them disappear without much of a fanfare. So hopefully that'll give you an idea of the all of the events in the Nobunaga Uesugi war and the general significance of the Uesugi clan and the great Kenshin. Kenshin's a very interesting character. Very religious, very drunk man, and one of the great commanders. Although of course, you could argue that Kenshin wasn't really a great commander in terms of his achievements, because although he fought many battles, 10 years campaigning against Takeda, 10 years campaigning against Hojo clans, in both of those major campaigns, he didn't really gain anything. The Uesugi clan didn't benefit from Kenshin's leadership. Here's Kenshin now, in fact.
Nobunaga, your life ends now.
So, he's going to try and take me out, as usual. Standing in his cav charge, so I'm going to be a little bit careful fighting him here, because I'm sure he's a powerful unit. And you're about to see me cycling through every unit I have, trying to find someone who has the silent skill, so that I can stop him using his special abilities. Anyway, I was just saying my slightly controversial opinion that Kenshin wasn't necessarily a great warlord or a great commander, because he never really brought anything. He never brought success.
I'm more than just
possibly just because the opponents he faced were always just as good as he was. As I said, he spent, well, his entire life, from 14 to the age of 48 when he died, on campaigns, fighting countless battles, and always using novel formations, and making the best use of tactical combined arms forces of the era. One of the only generals to use combined arms forces, the clever use of different types of units together to try and achieve strategic goals. He was the only one doing that sort of thing, so I guess that was genius, but nothing came of it. He spent so much time trying to capture Hojo castles and failing, and fighting with Takeda in these 5 battles, only one of which was actually decisive and didn't really seem to make either side gain or lose anything. But his only real successes were in capturing Nano Castle and annoying the Hatakeyama clan. But since after he died, that was all lost because Nobunaga sent what are their names, Toshie and Katsuie, to just go and quickly recapture them after Kenshin died whilst they were distracted, and everything just went back to how it was. And in the end, Oda had taken over half of Uesugi's satellite territory, and Uesugi, after the life of Kenshin, was left only with what they began with, their home territory. And their home territory was in civil strife due to the civil war his crazy leadership system had created. Basically, his crazy leadership system involved having more than one heir simultaneously and demanding that they would cooperate and share power, and there was just no way that that would work. People hated sharing power, especially in this era. So he tried to pass his own power down to his 2 sons, and they instantly started infighting. All the retainers had to side one way or the other, and it just sent into chaos and devastation for the people of Echigo. The people of Echigo were famous for their independent spirit. They didn't even want to be ruled by clans, they just wanted to be left alone. So they were already a very rebellious people, so that didn't help either. Anyway, so you could say, in conclusion, that Kenshin wasn't this great warlord because he never really achieved anything, but you could also argue that he prevented the Uesugi clan from being destroyed when perhaps it might have been by the Takeda, and that he at least conducted the war with the Hojo in such a way that he minimized casualties and maximized the possibility of victory, although it's just unfortunate that victory wasn't possible in the long run, but he did try. And anyone else would have done much worse than he did, so you can look at it like that, and in which case he was one of the greatest commanders. But in terms of like what was achieved by his commanding, it's a little bit worse. So you could say he's a really good tactical commander, but perhaps not a good strategic commander, something like that. Anyway, we're approaching the end of the level. You can see that this guy, Kanetsugu Noe, used that annoying water wave attack on Katsuie, but luckily Katsuie has massive defense stats, so it didn't do too much damage to him. So I managed to take this guy out just before the battle ends, if I recall. I should say that what would have happened, I believe, if I hadn't destroyed all of those rocks, was that I wouldn't have been able to access this area where Kenshin was hiding. So I think that was the purpose of those rocks, because it said something about the rocks protecting his temple, and there was a little temple just beside where I was fighting him. So it's possible there would have been a blockage or something, and I would have had to go back and spend hours trying to find those rocks again. So I'm glad I got rid of them early on. So it looks like I defeated all of the enemy officers. Got a pretty good score. Lost quite a lot of troops due to those water wave attacks, but still managed to get the rank S. And we're going to get a pretty good selection of prizes, so let's have a look through. Rally secrets, not too interesting, just teaches rally skills, which is an attack buff. Karakawa armor, can't even say that. I think that's the armor that Kenshin was wearing, pretty cool. Sovereign Palomino, this interesting horse, which makes your troop ability is more likely to increase. Didn't even know it was probabilistic. Anyway, got this Rasetsu helmet, very big helmet. And the Etchu Spear Monk, so a spear unit with 3x Spiral special ability that I've never seen. Basically it means they use their special ability 3 times in a row for every time you press it, so just triple damage essentially. And these Lucid Halberds have the same ability. And the standard selection of levels up. Kicho beats Nobunaga for level now, so Kicho is now my best unit. So let's see the aftermath. What's Kenshin up to?
49 years of dreaming. Dreams of victory. Dreams of death.
My Lord Kenshin!
Nobunaga. The battle is yours.
So we see in the legend Kenshin submits to Nobunaga by defeating him in battle. Obviously, as I said, he died early on this really.
I must return. You handle the rest.
We shall not fail you.
Katsuie and Toshie would indeed, over the next 4 years, as I mentioned, capture the rest of Uesugi's territory. So that's what Nobunaga's sending them off to do now. So we're not going to be able to use them in the next battle, I believe. Let's have a look at what it says.
In each area, the Oda forces were successfully moving to restore peace to the land.
Peace by war, guys.
On the other hand, the anti-Oda forces had gathered at Ishiyama in Osaka.
So here's Ishiyama again.
Though suffering great losses, they continued to oppose Nobunaga.
This is our third time seeing the 10-year siege in this game.
Unless the rebellious forces at Ishiyama were quelled, the Osaka area would not find peace.
So it seems the next level is going to involve quelling the Ishiyama rebellion. So I think I've mentioned before,
let's review our strategy.
It wasn't really quelled by battle, it was quelled by diplomacy, so it'll be interesting to see what the game presents us for next week's episode.
My lord, I have a report. The rebel Hisehide Matsunaga has suicided at Shigisan Castle. They say he stuffed gunpowder into tea bowls and blew himself up.
Yes, the death of Matsunaga was quite interesting.
My lord, here is the current situation.
Matsunaga was a rival of Nobunaga. He used to serve under him. He was the guy who, loads of episodes back, was being advertised as an evil man who was obsessed with tea collecting. And basically Nobunaga was also obsessed with tea collecting. And Matsunaga had this collection of rare tea urns. And the reason he blew himself up along with all the tea urns, as I've just said, was just to stop Nobunaga having them. He wanted to give Nobunaga one last spite that you can't have my tea urns or my head. I'm going to just blow myself up so you won't have the honour of killing this rebellious officer or the nicety of having some free tea urns. So I guess one last evil act for the evil man. So here we go, Ishiyama is the next level. We're just against Sex, and it's a level with that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 difficulty. So not quite as hard as that level supposedly was, but not so easy either. So there wasn't really any final battle at Ishiyama. Basically there were several minor battles between say 1578 and 1580, which is about the time period we're looking at now. But there was no decisive battle because, as I mentioned before, they eventually surrendered when Nobunaga forced the emperor to write a letter to them begging them to surrender, and it succeeded. So I guess the game is going to make up a non-historical battle again for this one, but it is still going to vaguely represent the historical events of, well, the Ishiyama, I guess. The big battles at Ishiyama took place earlier in history, sort of around 1575, when Nobunaga was actually trying to assault Ishiyama fortress, but at this stage in history he'd basically given up and decided just to siege it. And this sieging was the reason for the Battle of Kuzuryu, which we saw last week. So anyway, I hope you look forward to next week's episode of The Legend of Nobunaga. Should be a little bit easier than this level. I must say that this level 10 difficulty stage I think was even easier than the other level 10 difficulty stage. So come on, Kessen 3. If you're going to say it's going to be hard, at least make it hard. I think it might be because when it says that the level's going to be difficult, I really opt my game and play really carefully and strategically, and as a result actually do quite well. Whereas normally when I'm playing I do it fairly casually and I sort of use my troop skills willy-nilly and are willing to take some losses because you still tend to get rank S even if you don't do things perfectly. But anyway, enough of that, so I'll see you next time on The Legend of Nobunaga when we're finally going to end this rebellion, and really we're going to move towards the era in which Nobunaga dies historically. So we're going to see how the game treats the death of Nobunaga in a legend in which Nobunaga does not die. So they're going to have to come up with some reason for him to survive. How are they going to do that? Well, we'll just have to find out next time. Have a good week. See you next time on The Legend of Nobunaga.